Hey gang, welcome back to Joe Daddy's Garage. Today's video is part 59 in the Cobra Jet series, also known as Slither. If you're just now tuning into my channel, this is a 1969 Mach 1 Cobra Jet that was brought to me a year or so ago, and it was basically rusted to pieces, and I rebuilt the car using mostly dynacorn parts. So I'm in the process now of getting it ready for paint. In previous videos, I've worked on the fenders, the doors, and a few other things, trying to get all that addressed before I get to the actual paint stage. I'm also going to address a few other things that just need to be detail corrected, let's say. I want to work on the deck lid and the extensions and make sure that all of that lines up and looks good. It's okay to have some variables in there. The original deck lid had a really nice peak on it. The aftermarket one is rounded, so I want to make it look more like the original. So let's take a look at the car and see what we have going on. Now, in a previous video, I was working on the top of this fender, showing you how to block sand and get rid of these dents. I also did some transition work here where I had welded onto the front edge of the door, did some modifications. This is 96% done. There's still a little bit of work that I need to do on the inside of that just to clean it up. Everything else is good on the back of the car. I've also worked on some of the gaps, trying to make sure they're all tuned up and correct. And they're pretty consistent now on both sides. Very happy with that. The driver's fender is now fully bolted on. I have all the bolts in the top of the fender, the bolts in the front, and the bolt in the bottom. Now, this side is much better. There's still some variables here. I may end up having to grind some of this down just to make this a better transition. But overall, this gap is very consistent and mimics what the original ones really looked like. Because these cars had really big gaps because of the swing of this door. If you don't have it right, you end up hitting it in this area right here or in this area right here. So back here, this transition is nice. I did do a little bit of filler work here. I found that there were some small issues with the quarter panel, and now everything transitions very nice. So the back of the car, everybody already knows this is all new metal. This is everything you see here is new, and I have the aftermarket deck lid and original extensions. So up front here in the shop, in my paint booth area, I have the aftermarket deck lid that I'm using that was supplied through Dynacorn. I have these extensions. Now, these weren't the actual extensions that came on this car. Those extensions were in bad shape, and these I'm using from my original car, and I bought some aftermarket ones that I'm going to put onto my car. I feel like it's more important to have the original fenders on, or original extensions on this car, just because of what it is. My car is just a plain Mach 1. I have cleaned up the threads on the backside of these, and to show you this, if you put this extension up against the deck lid, maybe you can see that the extension has a crisper body line and the deck lid is rounded off. I demonstrated this previously with a body gauge tool to show that shape, and ideally I want this peak to be taller and a little more crisp, so I will just use body filler. There's no reason you can't use body filler on something like this. This is an area, I know people, they stress out over this sort of thing, but the reality is there's nothing, it makes any kind of contact with this. There is nothing that's going to shift this or cause a problem, so body filler is fine, and I'll build it up and shape it, and I'll show you how to shape that to try to make it match both of these. So I also have the original trunk hinges here that I have cleaned up and primed, and these are the inserts. If you ever wonder, if you ever see a pair of these and you're like, what are these for? They're the inserts for inside of the hinges. So this slides in there, and that little tab holds that in place, and now it gives you a place to mount the deck lid. So I'm going to get all that in place, and we'll take another look at it. All right, so I want to put these hinges on, and if everything goes the way I plan, these hinges will just stay on the car. Because once it's ready for paint, I don't need to worry about it anymore. So I've got the original bolts here from the deck lid and the mounts. So I'm going to use those, clean them up. Now I've had these on here before and had everything lined up really nice. So I don't want to get too carried away and have it, you know, I want to be able to move things, so I don't want to make it too tight to start with. These are pretty easy to put on. You know, the old other cars, the 65 and 6 and that had the rods, and I think they did us a favor when they switched over to these coil spring type of hinges. I wish they would have done that on the early cars. I don't know if they make a adapter kit or something. I'm sure somebody may, where you can put something similar on one of these cars or one of the older cars. So these bolts are all 7/16, and I'll put a little bit of tension on. I mean, I'm not gonna go crazy on it. Just put a little, just to keep them in place. And then these plates, as I mentioned before, when you put these in, the bolt holes or the nuts go to the outboard side, because that's where the bolts come in. So I'll grab the deck lid. Oh, and I'll point out too, originally whenever we were, you know, Charles was planning to build this car, he wanted to put the wing on the back. And this deck lid does have the cutout, which it should, for the wing. However, we're not using that. The original car did not have the wing. So we're gonna forego the wing. And you know what? Let me get something else. While I'm thinking about it, I keep these blankets around. That way I'm not hitting stuff on itself, like the primer or the paint. Okay, that's simple enough. And of course, there will take a lot of adjustment to get this exactly where I feel like it needs to be. So these should turn in pretty freely. All these holes have been cleaned up. Now I always think about when they were putting stuff together on the assembly line, and guys just being so experienced with these things that they could just pop, 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 get them on and get them adjusted in like no time. Now I have no preset location here. I'm just gonna raise it up a little. And then just a matter of cycling this up and down a few times and trying to figure out which way it needs to go, fore or aft or anything like that. Okay, so I've given myself a lot of room right now. I've got a pretty good gap up here at the top. That first test, I'm a little bit high, but this also lets me look at how the hinge is. So again, there's a lot of movement you can do on this to make things happen. A little here, a little there. Okay, I'm going to get this fine-tuned, make sure everything is where I want it to be, and then I'll put the latch in so it's in the right spot as well. But you can see this is really close to where it needs to be right now. And some of this may change once I put the extensions on, so keep that in mind as well. Now I'm going to put the extensions on, and you know, these have a groove in them that is meant for a rubber gasket. Most of the time I don't use that rubber gasket. What I normally do is I put washers on these posts to act as shims, and that way there's no contact, actual like tight contact between this and the quarter panel. Now that doesn't mean I won't use the rubber gaskets, because the 69, this is maybe a little bit better design than the early cars, but normally that's what I do, is I just shim them. So put this on, and I'll get the nuts on and tighten down. Do some minor adjusting as I'm doing this. I may have to get a different tool to tighten these up, I'm not sure yet. Yeah, I don't want to put a hard stress load on these, so I'm not going to. I was going to use the screw gun, but I don't think I want to do that now. Now these even didn't fit super nice, you know, original. So I may do a little bit of work up here on the top. I see that this edge on the quarter panel is just a little bit round right here. So I may end up taking some filler and just trying to make that transition a little bit better. Always trying to improve these things. Okay, same thing here, a little bit of a gap. Now, again, the rubber gasket may address that, but I'm not too worried about this at the moment, because even if I have to make some adjustments later, the shape of the deck lid and the shape of the extensions will be the same. Meaning that once these are matched to each other, then if I have to move the extension aft or outboard a little bit, or let's say aft a little bit with the gasket, I can also adjust the deck lid to match that. So my concern right now is I just want to make sure this all lines up. And that's pretty close. I have to do a little bit on the other side. I'll get that adjusted, and then we'll take another look at it. Okay, I have this all lined up the way I want it, and what I want to demonstrate here is this contour gauge. So if I come in on the peak and just compress that down, and then I come over to this part, the deck lid, hopefully you can see, that's what I'm talking about. That shape is just not there. So again, there's the extension, and there's what I'm lacking on the deck lid. Hopefully you can see that light coming through there. So what I'll do is I'll scuff this on this top section here with 180, come back and add filler, and then start working it into the shape that I need so that it looks more consistent with the extensions. blow that out and we'll get some filler on there. So I'll mix this up and apply it. Make sure your color is consistent all the way through when you do this. And remember, whatever you're putting on, you're probably taking half of it back off anyway. But that's all part of the process. So, what I want to do is kind of come in like this. Because the idea is that I want to kind of create a high point, more or less, that I can come back to. So I'm not trying to make this all in one shot necessarily, but I want to have that raised section as my reference point. And I don't try to overmix my filler. Like, I don't mix up the whole can. If I need to add more, I will, and I know I'm going to. So at this point, I'm just trying to mix just enough to get started. And I think I'm pretty close to that. I'm going to curve my paddle a little bit and try to get that shape that I want. And if I get it all in the first try, fantastic. If I don't, that's okay too. I don't know if you can hear it or not, but it's raining today. I really want to make sure I have all of this edge covered. You can almost smell this stuff, can't you? Can't you? Okay, I think I'll leave it at that for now. Alright, so I have the filler on, as I had mentioned, and what I'm going to try to do is shape this to be more consistent with these extensions. I also have this 4-foot long straight edge that I can use as a guide in a way and see where we're at. So obviously I'm sticking up pretty high. You can probably see the gap there, maybe a 1/4 inch at least at this point. And that's okay, because I just wanted to get this started by building up this peak, and then I'll shape it using my sanding block and some 180 grit. And also I'm going to put on my respirator. So what I'm trying to do here is just see where I'm at with the filler. So maybe you can see this or not, I don't know. I just got the primer starting to break through here and here, and I'm only doing like half right now. I'm just trying to demonstrate this on the right side of the car. So I want to continue shaping this And this will end up being kind of like a peak, like a lot more pointed than it should be, and then I'll address that. I know, pretty exciting, right? Well, at this point, what I have is the basic shape that I'm looking for. And as I'm block sanding this, I'm following the contour of the deck lid. So crisscross pattern, and make that flow. And now I have basically a somewhat of a void. And I expected this because you can't just build up that much filler. So I'll blow this out and then add some more filler to this to finish out those, fill in those voids. Now again, a lot of this is going to get sanded off, but you can see I have a peak here now, a corner, and so I have a foundational point to build to. This is still taller than what it needs to be, but I want to make sure I have all these voids filled in at this point, so time for more filler. Oh, there's a corner. So this is cured, so I'm going to go over this again. I may just take my DA and just do a quick skim across just to break the edges down. Not a big deal, you can use a block. I'd like to use a DA sometimes, as I've shown in other videos, but I will continue to block sand. I'm going to put my respirator back on. I feel like there's enough of it on there, but I'm going to add one more little bit of filler because I just don't want to void. Once I get sanded exactly how I want it, I don't want to have to come back and add something to it. So I'm going to go over it one more time. And you can see how by following the shape of the extension and the deck lid, that I can mimic that transition all the way across. And it's very, very close, but I'm not going to take any chances and have a hollow spot. All right, I have resanded this, and you can see pretty well. I would say that's a pretty straight line. If it wasn't such a thing that, you know, be a sharp edge, that would be kind of cool to have that, but obviously that's not going to work. So I will have to sand that down. Now, when I do this, I'm just going to be using a block and kind of trying to replicate the shape on the extensions as much as I possibly can. So I'm going to use my respirator again, and it might be a minute, but I'm going to start shaping this. And I may actually take the DA and just knock that corner off, just to make it quick. Take advantage of that shape. I'd say that's pretty close. I'd say that's pretty close. Might be able to bring it down just a little bit more on the top, right through here.
Oh yeah. I like it.
All right, I'm pretty happy with that. Now, as I said, when I built this up, I wanted to have enough on here so I didn't have any voids. And even with the couple rounds of filler that I added, I ended up with a couple voids. So I think there's one right there, a little bit of something there, a couple there, and then this one on the end. So what I'll do is I'll blow this out and then just touch up those few spots and resand it. I'll sand these edges so that everything is squared up and nice, and we'll go on from there. Okay, I did my what I consider final sanding on this, and if I take my contour gauge again, move over to the deck lid, that's pretty consistent. And that shape should be consistent all the way across. So, I think I'm done with the deck lid part of it. Also, I'll open this up. You can see there is filler there. I'm not hiding any of that. But again, the reality is there shouldn't be anything ever making an impact with this. Like somebody hitting it with something, a hammer, you know, if you're gonna damage the body filler, well, you do the same thing if it was metal and you hit it with something hard enough to damage this, you're gonna dent the metal as well. So I'm gonna show you something else that I'm also doing at the same time. And I know that I've done this before in other cars, and in this situation, I've been working on the extension over here on both sides. Now what I ran into was, even though this fit really close to the shape of the quarter, there was still a bit of a line or a bit of an edge there. So what I normally do is I take body filler and I'll put it onto the quarter, a thin coat. I mean, this was just like a 1/16 of an inch. And by doing that and extending this out, so I'll keep moving this slightly forward, and that'll allow it to have a good transition. Because if you were to bring filler in, say in a short, let's say a hand width, and then sand it to fit this, when you look down the body line, you're going to see that. You're going to see that line of that, where it kind of creates a V, a very, very flat V, but it would show up. So by extending this out, in a sense, you're tricking the eye, because you're now extending this all the way forward, and you're catching the transition of the quarter from way up front and bringing it all the way back here. So this takes time. You know, this is not an easy thing to do necessarily, but I would just add a little more filler, thin coat here, fill up any voids that I may have on this side, and sand this out to make a good transition. The other thing that I'm going to do is work on the top. So this line right here, this is a pretty good gap, and I don't like that. So the way this fits over here and fits over here is pretty snug. So I will take filler and add into this gap and just shape it to match. And then what I'll end up doing is I have to break this loose. So I'll take the bolts loose and I'll tap this with a soft mallet and try to get it to shift sideways so that I break the filler. Once I break that filler, now I have basically a line to work with. So even if it takes a slight chunk out of it or something, I can still work with that, because now I should have an edge, and then I can sand that back a little bit and could do a couple test fits. And then once I get that established, I can add some filler underneath that to help support it. So the idea is that I don't want to have, you know, a gap back here. In fact, if it were ever to get wet, water would come in there and run down inside. Now granted, there is supposed to be a gasket inside of this, and I haven't found one yet. I don't think I did. I might have. I might have found one at NPD, but regardless, I want to clean this up a little. So I've been doing that on the other side already, and I'll show you that because this side had a better fit. It was closer to being accurate, but in this case, the extension was actually inboard a little bit. So like this line, that is actually the quarter panel. And so by adding some to here and sanding it across from the quarter, I now have a consistent shape all the way through. And I'm doing this similar work up on top here, as I mentioned, building this up. So this side's almost done. I've got a little bit of filler to add here, maybe a little bit over here, and then I will use my round block to continue the shape. But you can see I have a good filled area here, and then I'll break this loose and build up from there. So I may show some more of that as I progress, but my main focus on this was getting the deck lid correct, or what I say is correct, and making it look much better than it was. So now here's something I want to show you that is, in my opinion, important. May not matter to everybody else, but when I see this, like I have this high metal here, this is some of original primer, I believe, that was on this extension, but I see that high metal. Well, I can run my hand up and down, and I can feel there's a dip right here, and right here, and right here. And the reason that is highlighted is because high spot, high spot, high spot, high spot. So I'm glad I'm doing this, because what I can do is put a swipe of filler on here and take care of that as well. Now this may not be that critical to everybody, but I can see this, or I can feel this with my hand, and I know I would be able to see that later on. So I want to make sure this is a nice transition, and you can see I've also worked this edge back to where the filler eventually will be broken, of course, and there's like the primer of the extension. So I'll continue to work this section here, and on the driver's side I have everything. You can see again there's primer, so a little bit of filler is here. I need to add some right here because again here's high metal, and I'm sanding, and there's a little high spot here, so there's a dip. Small dip here and a small dip right there. The rest of this is transitioned really nice, and this side's almost ready to come loose, but I want to make sure I take care of all these little just nooks and crannies that need to be addressed. So I will take care of that. I'll put a swipe on there and then resand it. We'll take another look at it. Now I know this isn't the most exciting thing, but I'm still going to demonstrate crisscross, right? So let me angle this down just a little bit more. And anytime you're using a block and you want to do block sanding, crisscross, okay? Okay, so there's a little more to do down here. I'll finish that up in a minute, but also I'm going to again demonstrate using a round, same kind of deal. The small area that you can still crisscross, and this is where I talked about the dips being across here, so I'm trying to address that. So I really want to have a nice smooth, transition here at the top. And the tricky part is the shape that they kind of create out here. It's a soft line. So the body line is not a hard, crisp line, but it's decent. And then it gets very soft and fades out back here. So you got to be a little cautious with how you're doing this, because you could easily create a sharp line just by following the body. So you can see that line right there. You should be able to see that line. I don't know. Let me look. So you create this kind of hard line. Same kind of idea that I was doing on the deck lid. But I can also see the primer. So I'm pretty close to where I want it. And then I come back across this way and soften that back up. Now it's a little even more defined. And there's more sanding to do. I'm not going to finish that just yet. I want to get all these other areas smooth and have a good transition. And ideally, you want to have the filler just fade into like a soft cloud, like this up here. Looks like it can be like a soft cloud. Now this is the most tedious part of doing bodywork, is block sanding, but when it's all said and done and there's paint on the car, it'll show up and you'll be very happy with the results. I like that. That's a lot better. I'm going to come back to the other block because it has a crisper edge on it, or a sharp edge on it. And all I want to do is kind of dig into this what would be the seam area, just a little. You can't do this with the round block. I've got a little shallow area right there I'm trying to get rid of. There we go. Round that off a little more. Pretty close. So I'm going to finish up this bottom section here, and then we'll move on. All right, it sure is pretty. I'm going to loosen up the nuts on the inside just a little. I'm going to see if we can't get this to fracture in a nice way. You never know for sure. So I've got my mallet here. It's holding on pretty good. There we go. I got some separation going there. And like I said, I'm not too worried about it cracking the edge, just so I have the basic shape that I need. Get this other nut off, and voila. So now I do have a line, and I can see where this, like this little piece down here is broken, and that's okay, because I need to have this edge regardless. So I can clean that up, but I really want to be focused on this edge and how it's going to clean up. And it's going to take a little more filler just underneath that. And there's really not much there. I know I talked about it before. So let me look at this block. I'm going to bring you back behind here a little. Okay. So there's really, I mean, barely any filler on this thing at all. I'm going to take my block and square that up as much as I can. And this takes some finesse too. You have to know where you want to end up, kind of thing. So obviously you don't want to take off too much, but you don't want to leave so much sticking out that it doesn't line up correctly. Now this is a pretty hard corner right here. That's not what I want. There's a little bit of material missing up here in this top edge. So what I'll end up doing is adding some more filler up here to fill those little voids, and then come back to reshaping it. I have a few other places I'm going to have to add some filler, but this is a good start. Now the end result is I will round this off. I don't want to have a sharp edge. So I'll do the same thing with the extension. I'll work it, get these edges squared off. The extension I really shouldn't have any issue with once everything is sanded. And then I'll like I said, I'll break this edge down so it's rounded. And I know I'm kind of fighting with where the camera's at right now. Let me back this up a little bit. Yeah, I mean, there's hardly any filler added to that overall. So if I just set this just quickly back up into place, once I round off these corners a little more, after I do the rest of the filler work, it's going to look pretty good. Let me angle that down so you can see. Yeah. Oh yeah. A little more to do. More of the same, right? 180 grit. Just gonna follow the body line. You'll notice I'm keeping pressure on this side of the block. Everything over here is just riding. It's not being pushed on. You'll notice I'm really not even taking any of this primer. I mean, some minimal amount of primer. I'm riding just on the high parts of the body filler. They're just starting to break through a little bit on the side, but I really have the shape that I need right now. Now, if there's any other little pockets or anything, I'll come back and add filler. So there's that surface, the top surface, and then I'll square up the face. And then I'll do the same on the side. Then I'll work this edge. Now I had added some to the little gap that was there, just a little. So you get the idea. Now I did add just a little to this edge on the extension, so just clean that up. And it will need a little more, but at the moment, that's all I wanted to do was establish that edge. Now, when this fits up here, I don't expect it to be a zero gap. Like, I don't want it to be that you can't see anything. So the gap that I'm going to end up with, I just want it to be more square and consistent. So I will continue to work the edges on both the extension and the quarter, and I'll just keep test fitting until I get the gap that I want, and I'm happy with it. But right now, this is really close. Like I said, I want to see it consistent. So I know a little has to come off down here. Getting closer. So I think you get the idea. I'm going to continue working this, and when I'm done, I'll show you the end results. All right, I have gone over this and filled up any of the voids that were on the edge, and of course I've still used the block and gone over the edge, cleaned it up. And so now with this transition being consistent, smooth, and if I find any little flaws like that right there, I'll get rid of it. But I've got a very sharp edge. So I've also gone over anything with the extension that could be a problem. And now if I butt this up against the quarter, really I have almost I won't say perfect, but really tight fit. However, that's not really what I want. I don't want it that tight. I want it to have a little bit of a, like the factory stamping, it would have been slightly rounded off. And, this panel for the quarter had a lot more of a round radius on it. So what I normally do, and again, this is the block, when I sand it like this and sand it up here, make sure everything's good, I'll take just a piece of the sandpaper, just a small piece, and I can just kind of go over this a little, and what I want to do is break this corner. Now, I'm not trying to make it overly round, but I want it to look more like what the factory piece would have looked like, or what it should have looked like. So I'll do that, and that's going to soften that up. A lot more consistent. And then I'll do the same thing on this lower section as well to make sure that it's got a roundness to it. And this is where you just have to have a feel for what you're doing and how you want it to look. I definitely don't want to come back and add more material later, but I'm not going to get carried away overly sanding it. And I want to make sure this corner up here at the top is consistent. All right, so once I have that established and I'm happy with it. All right, so I'll put the extension back up, get a look at it. And then I'll do the same thing on the extension. So I'm going to soften this edge up. You never really want a sharp corner, especially when you're doing paint. You don't want to have that because that's an easy flaw. The paint doesn't want to cover a sharp corner. Now also with this surface, all this is sanded here to where this ridge, this line on the inside, this hard metal line, will make contact first. What I mean is, I can put this on here, and it's not filler against filler, it's the metal ridge against the body. So I'm going to soften these up just a little more. Definitely don't get in a hurry. Now what I end up with is a nice tight seam, or pretty tight seam, but yet not a sharp corner. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. Pretty happy with that. I'm going to bolt that on and we'll take another look at it. All right, both extensions are bolted on, and now we have a really nice line. And again, this is not touching, like this part is not touching this part on the edge. It's on the inside. So this isn't putting any pressure on the filler. Same way over here. Nice consistent line. The shape is correct, or looks more correct, let's say. And even here, this has a little bit better consistent gap running up and down. And of course, the deck lid fits super nice. So, other than a few minor things to address, which will be just going over it and making sure that there is no cavities or shallow spots or anything like that. Once again, this is now ready for another round of high build. So this side of the car is completely done, other than I need to go over it with the guide coat and sand everything, make sure it's all smooth and there's no dents or hidden areas. And then I'll continue working on the other side And once all this is ready to go, then I'll reprime everything and go over it one more time. So that's where we're at. Pretty happy with it. Okay, so that'll be the end of this video. You know, this stuff is all tedious. It takes time. It takes patience. You know, I've been doing this for years and years and years. Back when I had the body shop, I did a lot of this type of work. Of course, doing all the restoration work at the shop as well. So my hands are pretty sensitive to any flaws or anything like that, and my eyes will pick up on that pretty quick. So you have to take your time when you're block sanding. Make sure you're doing the crisscross patterns. Don't dig in and try to create, or you may create a recessed area or a divot, and then you're back to putting more filler on. I also tend to use a little bit of filler at a time and work my way up rather than pile it all on and hope that I get it right on the first shot. By doing it a little at a time, I can see where the bad spots are and just kind of work those out. So anyway, just maybe some benefit to seeing how I do this kind of work. But that'll be it for this video. I want to thank my patrons especially for being a part of this. You know, it's hard enough to make these videos and not really get much from YouTube. And so my patrons help me to continue making these videos. In fact, if it wasn't for them, I probably wouldn't be making videos anymore. There's a lot to it. There's a lot of effort, a lot of time, and the return generally is not that great from YouTube. So if you're interested in becoming a patron, there is a link in the description below. Also, any products that I endorse or use, there will be links down below as well. That could be from Amazon or various other places. So take a look at that as well. But that'll be it for this video. So until next time, take care of yourselves. See ya. Hey gang, welcome back to Joe Daddy's Garage. Today's video... Alright, so this is...